Hey everybody, welcome to Critical Thoughts. I'm your host Braxton Smith, and as usual with me is co-host Jake Bird. Today is February 19th, 2018, and today is President's Day. So today we will actually be talking about, in our correct opinions, who the top three best and worst presidents in American history were. Now, like for me, the way I compiled the list, I went from from discussions I've had with people, lists that I've gone over on the interweb and over the last decade or so, and have heard like some of the best arguments, anyways, that I've seen. And if somebody makes a good argument, I take that on and I move forward with it. And if somebody makes a lousy argument, then I never listen to them again. And Jake, did you want to tell everybody what your approach was?
Yeah, recently I've been overviewing this book right here, Reassessing the Presidency. It's a collaboration of a lot of different libertarian authors and historians. And they did a few analyses from an economic perspective as far as size of government in regards to spending and also monetary policy, and pretty much just took what they had and did weighed it all equally and then plugged that in to get my top three and worst three. And it was kind of surprising to me because this isn't going to be all the hero stories or anything like that. It's just going to be the cold hard economic data, at least published as of 2001. And just another note, I'm not covering anyone after Clinton. I'm pretty much going to take that as a wash. They're as far as this perspective is going to be concerned, they're equally bad or equally good, however you want to look at it. They spend so much anyways.
Yeah, just kind of locked in on that word you used, data. That's just kind of your perspective on it, is like from the perspective of data. You fucking robot. So, all right, without further ado, I'm going to move on to who I think is the third best U.S. president we ever did have. Or were we doing worse? Which did we decide we were going to do? Worse?
I think we were doing worse first.
Okay, worse first. Yeah, because that was more predictable. So, like, you all out there already know who we're going to pick as our three worst presidents, as usual. It's an unpopular statement of the libertarian movement, Abraham Lincoln. And my reason for saying that he's the worst president we ever had was because he is responsible for more American deaths than any other president in American history, or any American period, actually, if you think about it. Suspended habeas corpus, which is basically the due process. So, like, he was the law, if you will, or what is it? I am the Senate, whatever. You get the idea. Another big beef I had with him was the fact that he stripped away one of the biggest constitutional rights. It was basically the rights of the states to secede. So states actually were given a constitutional right at one point. It's kind of like how I look at it, as sort of an escape pod, if you will. So like if the whole nation goes awry, your state still has its sovereignty where it can actually split away and separate itself from a tyrannical government. And he basically shut that down and killed over 500,000 Americans in the process. But that's all just the big points I had on him.
And that's going to be your worst or your third worst?
Third worst. We're moving up the list. Worst. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, just one thing I'll say on that. I don't think succession was ever actually like a constitutional right of the states, but by the mere setup of how the Constitution was formed, how the founders and all of history, when you look at the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers are set up, it was obvious that they had that ability because this was like a weird bridge between a confederation of states and a federated state with, provinces on the inside. But that's another thing you pointed out with states' rights. They got severely hampered, and that's one of the events, the Civil War, that led to the United States of America over the use of these United States of America more often, as far as diction was concerned as well. So,
Okay, well, so and who's your he was your third too, right?
My third was Woodrow Wilson. And
We're so predictable.
And the main thing that drug him down with the data was just spending, and what was the other one? Even percent change of spending, like, from whatever his starting level was, which direction did he go? He kept spending more consistently, and that's pretty much what drug him down overall. Is just spend the whole time, and not just with World War One, but we'll get to that a little bit later as well. I will say the one aspect that he did the best at was, as far as inflationary to deflationary episodes during his time, they were kind of somewhat balanced.
Yeah.
But overall, no.
Yeah, my Woodrow Wilson, he's always close for me between like the worst ever and the second worst, but I'd actually have to list him as my number one. So my beef with Woodrow Wilson actually is the fact that, as everybody probably knows by now, if you know anything about presidents, is that he actually signed into act the Federal Reserve Act, and thereby gave the power to the Federal Reserve to print currency, private banks to print currency and loan them to other banks. And so now we have the Federal Reserve as we know it today, and the Internal Revenue Service, which is like basically their own entity that's apparently above being audited. Apparently they're even more powerful than the government itself. So to me, especially now with crypto, they're trying to get into that too. It really, definitely my least favorite aspect of him. The other part, it was the fact that he was openly racist is kind of like really unpopular with everybody. It don't really jive with me either, obviously. But I mean, like, so far as how that applied to his policies, there's a few conspiracies about some eugenics projects he ran under the table, but nothing too obvious that you didn't already cover. Just the Federal Reserve was just probably one of the worst things that has enslaved our country financially, essentially.
Yeah, as far as outside of the money realm, another thing I always hated about Wilson was he was very interventionist. And one of the points that he had for talking, or, for trying to convince people to go into World War I, for the U.S. to join it, was that, well, if at least we're at the table, we can make a fair deal on both sides on how this thing ends. And what we get's the Treaty of Versailles for the German people, and,
Well, that actually turned out pretty well, though. I don't know if you read the history books. Treaty of Versailles turned out really well.
Did I say the wrong one? Or was it one? I know it's either the Treaty of Versailles or the Treaty of Paris that gets doubled. There's like the early American version, and then there's like World War I. But the treaty that ended World War I.
No, I'm pretty sure it was the Treaty of Versailles.
It was pretty much stomping on the face of the German people.
Yeah.
Forever and ever.
Yeah, and then him and his freaking League of Nations deal. That was creepy. Again, another one of those like where there's like, you can't really say that it destroyed America quite like you can with the Federal Reserve. It's just another one of those really annoying, authoritarian, creepy, globalist things that he was in bed with. But moving on to number two for me, and I don't know where he stands with you, but I know he's on your list, your boy FDR. Which, if he was really so bad, why did he get elected so many times, huh? Think about that.
Four-time president, but,
My biggest, hang on now. I get to say why I actually don't like him, though. I mean, sure, he was great and got elected, 4 times? Wasn't it? 4 times? Sure, he was great and
I
all.
think he died during like his third or fourth term. Yeah.
So the things I don't like about him, one of the most egregious things he did was, and people say, well, it was during war times, but I mean, there's no way to justify locking your own people up in internment camps. Was, to me, like one of the biggest atrocities in modern American history anyways. Locking your own people up. I mean, that's just short of, I mean, at least we didn't gas them, I guess, you know, like, I mean, and how far away were we from that? I mean, we're just a step away. What's the next step beyond that? Social Security, wasn't really a fan of that one. And then on top of that, also confiscating. He actually made the possession, if you had gold, the private possession of gold was made illegal. And if you were actually caught with it, you'd be imprisoned, it'd be confiscated, and then I think they also fined you on top of it. So, I mean, just totally egregious unilateral action coming down from his reign. So he was number 2 anyways.
Yeah, he was Wilson squared when it comes to interventionism, but he was a lot more about the economic interventionism. And as far as those internment camps, you know, people died in those things. If you see some of the museums where they've preserved the internment camps and stuff, it's like some pieces of wood with some tin nailed to them out in the desert.
Oh, shit. Well, I guess because we won the war and we got to write the history books, we just glorified it all and made it just sound like sunshine and lollipops. Okay. That doesn't surprise me.
Contrary to popular belief, a lot of the industries out there, for instance, the oil industry, the medical industry, are heavy regulated, and a lot of the regulations that came about during FDR's time are still alive and well in those industries when it comes to prices, you know, how many can be produced, quotas, stuff like that, along with food as well. You know, if you've heard about the mountains of butter that sometimes both we and European countries can produce from quota systems, you know, good old FDR.
Good old central planning. Yeah, that's far-reaching. It still affects us to this day, and that's why Woodrow Wilson too was my number 1. Is because when I look at my paycheck, I guess it's kind of a selfish thing, but when I look at my paycheck, it's a little more heavily affected by income taxes than it is Social Security. So maybe that's why I give Woodrow Wilson the win on the coin toss there. But so FDR was your number 2?
He's my number 2 as well when it comes to the economics too. You know, it's just.
So Abe Lincoln was number 1, huh? You racist.
Number 1, Abe Lincoln, worst president ever. And it's like, again, strangely enough, the best these presidents do is overall they don't have like dramatic inflation compared to deflation in their policies, but it's just spend.
Yeah.
Keep making the government bigger and better and taking over more things.
Yeah, central planning is definitely the central theme of who we consider worst presidents. And, you know, we were talking before we went on, and I think a big reason why these 3 guys are always the top of the list as the best presidents. We were kind of jokingly saying it, but then we started to realize that it is the common denominator, is that they actually had some of the biggest impacts. For better or worse, they did impact us as Americans more than most of your other presidents. And it's all your presidents at the bottom. They're all presidents that were hardly ever even alive or you know, in office for very long at all. They're very short presidential terms. So maybe that's the only reasoning I can come to, because constitutionally speaking, all 3 of them were just horrible presidents. So far as like us and our freedoms and like how that impacts us today, it's on overall on the negative side. So, anything else before we move on to the best presidents?
I mean, I think they also got, you know, the grander narratives too. You know, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, united the country back together again, even though most people don't talk about how repressive Reconstruction was. The states, even after, being formally integrated back into there, were like quasi-states or territories. They didn't even get to vote for a certain amount of time until all the various restrictions they put down on the southern states were implied, and that continued not just shortly after Lincoln, but to the next two presidents and almost to Hayes.
Oh, wow.
So, there's Lincoln, and then there's Wilson, trying to be the progressive scientist, the realist, trying to unite the world together with his, League of Nations and stuff like that. And then, Roosevelt, coming in during the Great Depression. Sure, he might not know that much about what to do, but at least he's trying all these different things to unite each other. And then World War II happens,
He's doing something, Jake. You got to do so. You can't do nothing.
Yes, the all unspecific something.
Yeah, and
great impact and grand narratives, I think, is pretty much what drives most of that.
I think it should be stressed too that as we were talking about earlier, it's so strange to me that like a lot of people that would say that, well, it was different times. It was during a time of war. It was during a time of crisis. These are the same people that go and justify all these horrible things that these presidents did because in the name of safety, in the name of keeping the American way alive. And yet, on the same hand, they'll turn around and they bashed Bush when Bush came along with a Patriot Act, and they, now the GOP, for example, they justify it saying that, well, this is during a time of war. We need to take your rights away to keep you safe. And to that I say, well, he was a terrible president too, and so were they for the same reasons. That it's not an excuse. This whole exchange your freedom for security is not an excuse because we've been at war how much? How long have we been at war as a nation? We would never be free. Like basically a majority since America's been around. Jake was talking about how like every one of these presidents, I think the lower end of these presidents was like 2 wars under their presidencies. You were saying?
Yeah. It's going to bring that up later on, but if you count Grover Cleveland's first term as president separate from his second one, because Harrison actually came in between him at that time, there's only 4 presidents that have only had at least just one war or conflict going on during their presidency. Whether they were, occupying a certain country or helping another country quell communists, or in the case of like Jefferson with the Barbary Coast, some very invasive Muslim pirates,
You
There's
Islamophobe.
always been war going on.
Yeah. Well, so anyways, we're kind of running up our time here, so let's hurry up and move on to the best presidents. I got my third best. Classic, kind of predictable, Calvin Coolidge. Now, the reason I like Calvin Coolidge the most is because he's one of those rare exceptions where, they always, that classic age-old saying, power corrupts. And the fact of the matter is, he was, like, so far as power concerned, the most powerful man in America. And he himself knew his limits. He knew his bounds, and every time something came across his desk, he wasn't so happy with his pen to just sign off things. He wasn't signing executive orders. He knew his place as a president was, if there was actually something significant, if there was something like that just absolutely needed the enforcement of the president, he would actually enforce it. But for the most part, he realized that, it isn't like, he isn't the Julius Caesar like a lot of our other presidents are, where he just unilaterally says, this is what I believe and this is what's going to happen. So the fact of the matter, he signed some of the fewest executive orders of any president while maintaining a full presidency. So that's why I give him number 3 anyways, is because he was humble.
Yeah, and again, that was supposed to be ideally what Americans were known for when they came to that presentation, because we weren't about kings, we weren't about nobles, we weren't about being grandiose with power. And, when Harding died near the end of his term and Coolidge was sworn in, they asked him, okay, what are you going to do now as president? And he said, go to bed, because it was like 3 or something in the morning. And it's like, that's it. He's the president now. He's going to do what he needs to do, but that's all there is, He's not some king. He's not some aristocrat. It's just another job to do that needs to be done.
Yeah, and maybe I'm being presumptuous, but it just seemed to me like he believed in the power of the American people to resolve their problems. At one point, that was actually the American way, was the American people resolve the problems, not politicians. And it's so weird now to me today that people vest all this interest. I mean, presidential approval rating, lower than ever before until recently. For the most part, lower than ever before. Same with Congress. And yet, for some reason, we believe these people are going to be the problem solvers for everything. So Calvin Coolidge was the epitome of, hey, you're the people, you be the change we need. But anyways, Jake, you're number 3. Go.
My number 3 is Harry S. Truman.
All right, and that's it for Critical Thoughts today.
And,
really?
By the economics, because he didn't really spend that much, and especially when you consider he came right after Franklin Delano Roosevelt, so that's your starting point.
Okay, wow. Damn, okay.
He
point
really
taken.
didn't spend that much.
I actually have never heard that argument. That's pretty good.
And then as far as inflation's concerned, he's among the top 15 of presidents, both when you consider it from the strictly Austrian perspective of always wanting deflation to be going on, or if you consider it from a more balanced perspective of not too much inflation, not too much deflation. He's still in the top 15. My list isn't going to make any sense to most people unless they stare at the
anybody happy. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. But you want me to go ahead and move on to my second one?
Do it.
Ulysses S. Grant.
Okay, like seriously. Fucking Zap Brannigan. Knowing the South's weakness.
When he's not being a general, apparently he knows his place as a president.
I gotta say, I knew him a lot better as a general than I did a president, so I gotta be open-minded on that one. But sell it to me, because I'm not buying right now.
The main thing with him is, from the Austrian perspective, he is all about the deflation, as far as monetary policy and how he affected it. I mean, as far as that list is concerned, he was number 3. And that kind of surprised me too, because Grant, you always hear about him during the Civil War, and yeah, you might know that he's one of the last presidents that had to deal with Reconstruction, but you normally don't hear anything else about him. And as far as spending was concerned, again, he's the second president after Lincoln, so big major interventionist and spender there with the wars not just the Civil War going on. But he was still in the top 10 as far as spending was concerned.
Yeah, and I guess he kind of had to be. I mean, to actually see that our country recovers after one of the most devastating wars we've seen, it's like you kind of have to be good to see that the country survives even. And not only survives, but goes on to be back-to-back World War champions. So Okay, I'm gonna have to look into that one more. I'm still not totally sold because there's no way he could have been such a horrible general, but then like a good. I don't know. I guess whatever. I'll look into that one more. My number two, which is the actual correct answer here, what Jake was looking for. I guess he got too caught up in his numbers to realize the second best. Speaking of generals, I would actually say would have been George Washington. I would have to list him as the second best president we had. I think he is the pinnacle of pragmatic presidents. He was kind of put into a situation where he actually did have to be the Julius Caesar, and unfortunately, with the precedents he left behind, I guess he left a bunch of other presidents feeling like they had to be the Julius Caesar and rule with an iron fist. But George Washington did an excellent job of keeping a nation together, ruling so strong, like with such an iron fist that he did keep the nation together, but not so hard that he lost sight of who we were as a nation, which was a free nation. Because at the end of it all, I mean, he was a humble man. He did, he was the one that came up, because they were talking about what title should we give you, and people are throwing around, well, how about king? And then he was just kind of like, really? Like, that's kind of what we're escaping here. And he said, well, how about president? And people are saying no, that's too humiliating, because the actual term president means to just preside over, just to be there. Like, it's not like is worked up as like an emperor or chancellor. It's not as renowned as a name. Just president is a very humble way of saying leader.
And actually, it wasn't even just president; it was Mr. President. It's like, all right, Mr. Postman.
Yeah, okay. So and then, I mean, you got to think about who this dude was. I mean, this guy freaking defied bullets on the battlegrounds. I mean, he was there at the forefront. Like, he had every reason to be an arrogant bastard and take over. He had every opportunity. People were handing it, saying, "Here, please rule us. Please make slaves out of us," pretty much is how they were acting after the war was over with. And he turned it all down. But at the same time, like I said, he showed force when he needed to. Whiskey Rebellion, kind of, that's a little debatable, especially in the libertarian community. They aren't really big fans of that. I think he could have handled it better, but presidents aren't without their flaws, I suppose. And I don't know. I had to have been there, I guess, to really know how that best would have been handled. But the fact that we're still here in one of the freest nations in the world, still to this day, I think says a lot about the precedents he set as president. So that's all I got.
Yeah, I think the libertarian answer to Washington and the Whiskey Rebellion is that Alexander Hamilton should have been shot sooner. But but yeah, I mean, he's the starting off point, and he's not just starting off this new nation, which is kind of a first to have these principles, but he's also building off the fact of not just one, but three different wars or conflicts. Shays' Rebellion happened before under the Articles of Confederation. That had an impact both as far as money and people. The American Revolution, of course, but there's also one of the Indian Wars was going on during both the Revolutionary War and I think up to the end of his presidency. So there's a lot of shit that was going on that everybody was trying to tie together, and he was the figurehead for it.
Yeah, and that's what confuses me, how at any point he would take second on any list, and he always does on all these lists. He takes second to Abraham Lincoln, and they're like, well, he kept the nation together, and I'm like, George Washington founded the nation that Abe Lincoln even had the opportunity to keep together. And then on top of that, he was the underdog. He was going against the world's most powerful military. Whereas Abe Lincoln had a freaking juggernaut army outnumbering the South 2-1. Whatever. Anyway, that was my number two. Who gets to do number one first? Well, we'll hear your boring answer first, and then.
Yeah. let me depress everyone, yes. And then you bring it in with the good feels.
Yes.
Number one. Andrew Johnson.
Ah, man, he's on everybody's shit
right
list.
after Lincoln.
He's on everybody's shit list, man. Like everybody, he's like right there with no, he's worse than Richard Nixon according to everybody. Well, except me. I don't know. I don't really know much about him. Tell us.
Again, coming right after Lincoln when it comes to government spending, that's a high bar to try to bring back down. So when they compare it, he is either number one or number two when it comes to spending, no matter what.
Okay,
and as far as inflation was concerned, he was a lot more of an Austrian. He was more deflationary. He is more wanting the money kept down, not having printed so much. But that's the thing, I think, and I'll deal with it later on after you get done with yours. I know one objection to this kind of list as well. Lincoln, Wilson, and Roosevelt all had three of some of the major wars that we had. These three major wars by most comprehension. And so, pretty much the presidents that followed right after them seem to be getting the top picks.
Yeah,
and I'll address that a little bit more later too. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Another reason why Johnson isn't that favored is both Johnson and Grant really tried to hammer home that the Reconstruction would actually be trying to unify the nation and not just dictate to the South what they needed to do. And Johnson was also a Democrat, so...
Oh, wow. One good Democrat, huh? All right. And, I think, too, it's important to note for everybody that's probably getting ready to hit that X button right now because Jake's done pissed them off. I do see some merit to what he's saying anyways, or to what you're saying. I'll start talking to you. There's some merit to what you're saying in that, these wars have incredible consequences on economies. I don't think a lot of people really understand the full gravity of what these world-changing, history-changing wars, they really strongly impact the economy because one, they're destroying, and two, they're re-diverting a workforce from actual productivity to destruction, and not only making the bombs but dropping them. So the fact of the matter is the whole world's left in shambles after these wars. And it actually does take somebody of exceptional, economic understanding, clout, what have you, just presidential material, if you will, just sum it all up, to actually carry a nation forward and see that there is a recovery being made. But even that, with that being said, and Jake does make some good points, the actual number one best president they ever was is Thomas Jefferson, you dingus. Probably didn't even cross your mind, did it?
It was number 6 on the list.
Well, I don't even know how this guy got on the camera, really. I apologize. I denounce him. For the record, completely denounce Jake and everything he stands for. That shirt is not licensed, by the way.
Narratives here. I'm just looking at the economic data. Okay.
Okay, fair enough. You fucking robot. So, Thomas Jefferson, I think, is the more principled out of all the presidents. He was, I would say, close between him and Calvin Coolidge. But like I said, George Washington was a pragmatic. He had to drop the hammer on a few occasions. Thomas Jefferson did have the luxury that George Washington put in all the hard work and took the beating, and then Thomas Jefferson just kind of came in afterwards and reaped the benefits of, all right, now that everything's set in motion, let's just keep this freedom train moving. And, I just want to rebuttal one of the biggest hits that he takes right now, though. Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder, and no, he didn't do anything to free the slaves at the time. He did set things up in the future. It's important that people understand that he set things up big time for the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement couldn't have happened if it weren't for the help of Thomas Jefferson setting that up in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And so far as him being a slave owner, it's important to understand that the time, the setting, you can only ask for so much at one time. There's only so much pull any one person has. And so if he were to actually come to everybody and say, hey, this way we're doing things, I know your livelihoods depend on it and the future of this nation depend on it, but we're going to need you to stop that. They would have probably hauled him out of town and he'd never be seen or heard from again. So that being said, again, he basically laid the blocks, like the foundation for freedom as we know it today.
The only bone I've really got to pick with Jefferson was the whole Louisiana Purchase, because he's one of the founding fathers. There's constitutional limits to what the president can do, and spending money on a purchase that has nothing to do with the budget of his cabinet and departments is a no-no. But, most people give him a pass on that because it
was worth it. Mm-hmm. There you go.
But,
he was a visionary. He was a visionary.
Means. That's the progressive motto, ain't it, though, Brax?
Well, I mean, hey, it's like, look at the outcome. What are the end results, though, right? Is it net positive?
To executive overreach, maybe. But to your other point with slavery and stuff, one of the other things that you have to really consider is there isn't really at that time a reliable way for someone to declare someone else is free. There really isn't. Like when some of the slaves fought in the Revolutionary War and they were free from that, there was a paper that they got. They got a certificate showing that they were part of the Revolutionary Army. Some of them probably still had some of the IOUs, if they were lucky, at the time of where they were supposed to be getting paid. That's something there, but at most of the time, and what you'll see with most of the founding fathers, like Jefferson, like Washington, is when they died, somewhere around like 5% of their estate went to their slaves and they were freed. And why would that happen? Well, a will is a legal document that would be recorded. So you could actually have written, presumably for all time, these people were free and this is what they were due. And another thing I like to point out is there were freedmen at the time, and there were freedmen that were slaveholders. And we know from some of them autobiographies of their slaves and from them themselves that they did that in pretense, right? They bought them, but as far as the plantation was concerned, they were free people. It's just that was the legal convention so that they could get them off the slave market. And I don't know enough about how historians have really looked into the founding fathers to see how much of their lives might have been like that or not to make heads or tails of that. But that's one of the things that I always kind of scratch my head about, considering they were men of principle.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, while they weren't able to push any policies directly forward from where they were, I mean, they did at least live up to it in their own private lives. They did what they could in their own private lives, which I think that speaks volumes as to where, if they could have, where they would have headed. But obviously they're limited to only so much. They're limited to where society was at that moment, I suppose. But that's it for me for 3 worst, 3 best. You sounded like you had a little more input on some of the presidents we've had.
The only other thing I really got right now is I said I'd come back to the whole wars thing, and that being like the main point. And to an extent, the effect of the wars probably does have a very major impact on how my list was presented because of the economics. But it wasn't, as we talked about earlier, like there was peace times all the time when it wasn't the great Lincoln, Wilson, and Roosevelt saving us from ourselves and from the evils of the world. And I'm hoping it's showing right now, but I've got the numbers listed right here. And the greatest number of wars and conflicts at any time was for Buchanan, Grant, and Wilson. So Wilson kind of gets a pass with that. He had the World War along with 10 other things going on. But Lincoln only had, 10. That's still pretty up there, especially since one of them's the Civil War. But FDR pretty much just had 2 going on. And if I remember, the other one was an occupation in another country that we were doing at the time. I can't think of it off the top of my head. But the point is, there's always wars going on. There's always spending due to wars going on. And even if these wars don't build up the same amount of casualties, you're still having to pay for the equipment. I don't think anyone would argue that our current wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and our interventions with Syria right now are any less expensive just because the casualty rate compared to some of these other wars is lower. And that's pretty much all I got. And yeah, I only did the numbering for 10 to -10 for the worst ones on here. I didn't number them all, but you'll see Washington's not in the top 10. You'll see Adams, it's not in the bottom or the top. The only familiar names is Jefferson at 6, and you mentioned Coolidge, he's number 10.
Yeah. Old Jake always using math to prove folks wrong.
Well, I mean, again, this is just from spending concerns and monetary concerns. I don't think you can really quantify being part of the founding part of the nation accurately in any sort of number. So,
yeah.
But when you're just looking from that perspective, this is how it kind of plays out.
Well, and I guess if you don't have any more, I guess I was just going to give my little last 2 cents. Okay, so I guess my last 2 cents is really, I think it's a hell of a note that, we even do have a President's Day, really. I think we put way too much way too much interest in presidencies and not enough into local politics. Because the fact of the matter is, at least as you can see through my choice for favorite presidents, is I like the presidents that do the least, because you get to a point where the presidents are coming down to how things affect you in your own local neighborhood, when really they should just be there for emergency situations on a national level. And so I guess I would just like to see in the future more emphasis put on, like, going to your elections for your governor, for your mayor, for your town council. And I'd just like to see smaller and smaller government, to where we can have these situations where right now we're seeing a huge schism in America between the left and the right, to the point where it's driving everybody bonkers, because everybody's freaking out over Obama going to destroy the country, and now he's out, and now everybody's freaking out that Trump's going to destroy the country. It's like, why does the president have that much power? They're not supposed to, really. They're not supposed to make half the country freak out that all of a sudden we're going to be persecuted. So, in the future, hopefully we'll see presidents that'll start to maybe forfeit that power. Maybe we'll see another Calvin Coolidge. No, Jake didn't really have any presidents that forfeited any power on his list, I guess. But
they didn't spend that much, and they kept the money sound.
Hey, there we go. We could actually use a lot of that right now. So that being said, any last input before we close it up?
Not too much. I mean, I can't agree with you more, and I think we're in a real paradox situation, because I think the natural mindset for most Americans is that, federal government shouldn't matter. most of the time, which is part of the freak out, part of feeding the freak out. But the problem is we've already handed over that much power. It's like the presidential war powers. What happened to Congress checking off on wars? Well, if the president feels like there's an incident that needs to happen, it's like,
Pandora's box is open. Good luck getting that power back, but that's
hello Iraq, hello Afghanistan, hello Syria. Is like
soon to be Iran.
Technically speaking, for most of their existences, they weren't officially declared wars. I'd actually have to check to see if they are right now, but the president started it, and we had retaliation, so of course he's got to go defend our troops and interests now that he sent some over there, and it's just, where does it end?
Well, who knows? Maybe in 2020, Adam will be our no president. All right, well, thanks everybody again for tapping into Critical Thoughts, breaking through the white noise to bring you the media that matters.